the opportunity to come down here and talk to you guys. I've already had some really interesting, great discussions with folks. As Gully said, my name is William Gunn. I sometimes go by Mr. Gunn. And that's my orchid, which you can't quite see there, a little bit cut off. But before I get into too much about, the meat of everything, I just wanted to give everyone the basics of where I'm coming from, personally, where I'm coming from professionally here. So I work for Mendeley, which is a company. It's based in London, started with a bunch of researchers, graduate students, software developers from a range of US and EU institutions, all designed around the idea that the whole research process has too much friction, and we need to make efficient tools for researchers to help them make progress faster. We recently were acquired by Elsevier earlier this year. So it struck me as I was sitting here listening to all of you guys that we kind of have the inverse problem to what you have. We have a great access to a very, very large amount of documents, roughly 400 million, that's 80 or so million unique documents. And we're looking for the best way to turn those into structured knowledge. We didn't start out with an idea and go looking for papers to mine specific things from. So just to kind of give you the main points up front, I think we have some things that we could do that might be useful for triage efforts. I think looking at the number of Mendeley users who have a given document in their library might be a useful signal as to whether or not, where they should be ranked kind of in your triage ranking list. And I think we also, I'll explain more about this later, are working on something that could be very, very useful for moving one step beyond just the computational mining of facts from the literature, assuming that everything published in the literature is correct, which I hope everyone here understands is generally not a good assumption to make. It's a simplifying assumption, but it's not a good one. So I hope that there is a way for us to use, I guess, the complementarity of our two situations, with us having lots of documents and an API, and you guys having the need to work on algorithms or extract entities or build good triage mechanisms to kind of mesh there. And I personally been hearing about a lot of really, really good use cases to take back to our team and say, we should totally be doing this with our documents and pulling this out. So the way that we worked, the way that we set our system up to begin with, was we thought, we want to have a tool that sits on the user's desktop that they interact with all the time. And we can pick up kind of this data exhaust or this latent information coming from their interaction with the tool. And so we built a reference manager. We built a thing that helps them organize their PDFs and format citations for a bibliography. And we aggregate the extracted metadata from all of these PDFs into a library on the web. You put a modern API behind it. And each person that registers with Mendeley gets a profile where they can upload their papers and connect with people. And so this gives you it gives you one layer of document level metadata, what journal is it in, what's the title, et cetera. Then it gives you a layer of social metadata, how have they classified themselves, who are they connected with, and what, or the names of the folders that they put things in. So it's kind of a way of leveraging this, or crowdsourcing, if you will, all of this information that people are doing just in the normal course of their work. So you don't have to sort of, cajole them along. They're already doing this work, and you're just picking up on it. Of course, so since we optimized for getting all of the documents in, into our system and gathering all of this data, we did not start with any sort of ontology. We just literally shoving everything into HBase. And so we've had to go back and figure out how to do entity extraction and knowledge enrichment from all of these these documents in a very, very, very scalable way. We just to kind of give you a sense of things, there's somewhere between 400,000 to 700,000 documents that are uploaded to our system every day. So we have to go through and for each of those documents every day figure out, okay, is this a duplicate? Is this not? Where does this fit in which cluster? So no manual curation system could possibly work, and in fact, most of the algorithmic curation systems don't work at the scale either. So we've been collaborating with some institutions, and I'm going to tell you just a little bit about some of the work. This here that you've been reading, sorry for all the text on the slide here, is essentially a project that we've been working on to do a lot of the things that many of you are working on. Very interestingly, I think one of the focuses, one of the interesting bits that's come out is starting with this amount of data, you can kind of go back to an ontology from just the patterns in the text anytime you have a massive amount of data like this. So the idea of the folksonomy, what users are entering descriptive tags on these papers just because it helps them organize their own things. They're putting them in folders, and then those are going to be different based on different people, but when you have thousands of people doing it, it all kind of collapses down to to something that looks very much like an ontology that you could pay an expert lots of money and to create for you. So we're looking at that. We're looking to do research into general tagging behavior, a lot of general crowdsourcing research. How do you get massive participation? What's the most effective way to channel the feedback you're getting in the activities into something that's useful and structured? One of the projects that we have begun working as part of the team project is looking at categorizing these papers, and I think most of you probably are familiar with the basic idea of topic modeling. I kind of think of it as, basically finding a way to move from just having the syntax, the stream of words, to get at the underlying semantics of the document. So in our catalog right now, we have the following categories. These categories were derived in a very, very simple way. If someone signs up and says, I belong to X discipline, then everything they upload, we assign that discipline. And so the same paper will be uploaded by people from a range of disciplines, so each of these has a distribution associated with it. But you can see we're very high in biology, less high in some other things. And each category we then break down, and you can assign yourself a subdiscipline. They kind of have that same sort of same distribution here, but you can see it's much more of a long tail when you get down to the subdisciplines. So the way that we think about topic models is you take the PDF, treat it as kind of a bag of words. The frequency of the words in there aggregates together to create, to associate into topics, and then we associate documents with those topic clusters. And when you run that across a selection of our computer science papers, using different numbers of topics, you can kind of get the log likelihood that the number of topics fully describes everything that you've got. And there's a peak of about 25 for computer science. Looking at biology, we should have done increments of 5 because there's a much sharper distribution, which is sort of interesting, I think. The way that what we realized from doing this is that, that the approaches that we take to kind of categorize and model the topics are kind of approaching the true categorization, kind of somewhat like the sample, mean approaches the true mean. Just conceptually, that's what we thought about. We have these things going down our decision tree, more or less, or our classification tree, and ending up, as they get more categorized at a different spot. The other thing that we've looked at is if you slice our corpus up into year slices, then the places where documents cluster change. So if you look at every document from 1980, you might find that a certain document that contains the words genes is going to cluster in a different area than if you look at, let's say, 2010 papers. So a lot of times you think of an ontology as kind of this top-down, very structured organization, but in our case, it's a very, very dynamic thing. Where a paper should be classified and the different disciplines that describe the corpus actually changes a whole lot as the research changes, as trends come and go in the literature. So it was the decision we made to not really have an ontology and to not do very much classification as documents came into our catalog. Turns out to kind of have been an interesting one, because now we can rerun these classifiers and see trends pop up and see new categories emerge from the data. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is when we did this, these are some of the terms that we pulled out from running it across our biological science papers. As you can see, it gets the molecular biology pretty well, cancer research, stuff like that. But then it's got this group over here, which all seem like subcategories somehow of some kind of animal work. And so I don't know, maybe if we refined our categories a little bit, you could pull out something that very efficiently classifies papers where they've done some type of animal model. And we potentially have a classifier built in for that. We'd be interested in looking further into that. So that's the one bit of work. Another bit of work that we've worked on is called the Code Project. And this was another straightforward data mining approach, but the idea is to push some of this data out into the linked open data cloud and build really some commercially useful aspects to it. So one of the first bits that has come out of this is a parser for PDFs that is context preserving. So you can pull out the title, you can pull out the background, and it keeps the flow of the text. And it knows this part up here is the title, this box over here is the authors, this is the background, and then this is how the text flows through here. So what you can then do is you can run this extractor over your PDFs and pull out all of the text, but you can also pull out the data tables themselves and turn those into something other than images of something that used to exist as actual data, like a PDF often has them. So that's really kind of neat, to be able to pull out this structured data, and then we can generate the document stream, and you can do more downstream things with it. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about, I'm going to leave a lot of time open for discussion. We can start after this, because I really want to hear use cases and what kind of things you guys are thinking about. But as I said, we have two things that I think would be interesting for this crowd, and one of them is the activity data that we have coming from the researchers uploading PDFs to our catalog, who they're sharing them with, how many folks are reading a given document, how those trends are changing. This could be an important discovery tool. We already have a recommender system built. We're looking to do some other things like that. And now the second part, the reproducibility thing. There have recently been some studies in clinical research, clinical science, where they've really started to chip away of the idea of the literature as any sort of repository of truth, and started to take a close look at the reproducibility side of things. Now, the computer science folks have been on this for a good while. Victoria Stodden and Run My Code, and those guys have good frameworks for uploading your data, uploading your code, rerunning it, seeing if you get the same result. In the biological sciences, we absolutely do not have any of that kind of information available yet. And it's looking like the majority of major landmark findings that are being used for drug development and things like that, and presumably also being curated with your efforts, actually are not should not should not have been curated because the findings are not true findings. And so that might be a strong statement, but we have very good evidence to believe that 50 to 60% of the results that are reported are not in fact true results. And if you do a replication, you are not able to reproduce the effect, or the magnitude of the effect is weaker, or maybe not even in the same direction as the original study. So obviously this presents a major challenge, which is one step beyond curating the results of what do you do with all of this stuff if it's not actually curated. So we've been taking this on as a project. We have started an initiative called the Reproducibility Initiative to see if we can figure out a way to just build up, some training data, some initial seed data of work that we know is reproducible and work that we know is not reproducible. And then maybe you can use that to kind of bootstrap from there and identify some sort of certainty score. Well, I think this is probably a highly novel result, but I don't think that this result is going to have any clinical relevance. Probably we'll end up pulling out things like papers using very novel techniques are not going to be highly reproducible. Papers with very small sample sizes, probably not going to be all that reproducible. And I think at least I hope, we will find there are some sectors, there are some techniques that tend to yield very reproducible data. I think it'll be interesting from a curation point of view to be able to say this particular finding was done, it was found using this technique, was found using this other independent technique, and it was also replicated by, one of these reproducibility initiatives. So there's a project in psychology who's doing the same thing we're doing. We are also taking the data we get from our pilot study here and bringing that to funders and bringing that to publishers and saying, look, you guys are funding this lab over here $1 million to do this study. Why don't you take 1% of that and actually have this replicated by a third party group and presenting them pilot data. So the amount of, and so we're actually going to be annotating the literature essentially with a reproducibility, stamp, so to speak. And initially we'll have 50 high impact papers in cancer cell biology to work with, but you can expect this to expand to a much larger realm of the literature as we get the publishers and funders on board. And we've had a number of good talks with funders. In fact, the NINDS is working on a program to do this right now. And the NIH is seriously looking at the reproducibility issue. So the final little comment that I wanted to say is I think we were successful as a crowdsourcing platform largely due to the fact that we were open ourselves. We had a usable API. People wanted to interact with us. They felt that they invested time in our platform that they wouldn't lose the investment they had put into that. And I think that was a really important part in our uptake. And it's a really essential thing to think about in any sort of software design project. If you want people to participate, make them feel like they're doing something useful and make them feel like their efforts, they're part of a community. Their efforts are not going to be lost if, say, the project loses funding or it's shut down or whatever. Make it connected to other things. So that's all I have to say, and I believe we have a couple minutes for questions.
Great, any questions? We have a couple.
It's just for clarification. You mentioned like thousands or lots of papers are uploaded to Mendeley every day. Are these uploaded by the users or by the company?
By the users.
By the users?
Yeah, we do some. We did do some spidering of repositories, and we had a publisher ingest program that works with open access publishers to pull in their content, but at the moment, but that's just kind of a drop in the bucket compared to all of the user uploads that we get.
So, for example, it doesn't really matter what, for example, if a journal, my university has a subscription to a certain journal and I have access to the full text, I can just upload that for everyone else to view. Is that?
No. So I probably should have gone into that. So the way that it works is if you have physical access to the PDF, you can put it in Mendeley, in your Mendeley account, just like you could put it in Dropbox or you could put it on a disk, right? Sharing it with other folks, however, works differently. You can create a private group where you can share the PDF with a limited number of your colleagues that you invite to that group, but it's hidden from the web. It's not public. So you can't post a PDF, with the exception of PDFs that you yourself have authored and you're putting on your profile. You can't post it publicly for anyone. But in those private groups, you can collaboratively annotate PDFs, and you can collaboratively highlight sections and things like that.
So on the Reproducibility Initiative,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't you expect that the actual reproduction studies have about the same reproduction rate themselves? And does that create a false discovery problem?
Yeah, so we are going to be doing a couple of things to improve on that. First of all, we're not using other academic labs to reproduce the papers. We're using third-party core facilities to do this. So so for a given technique, we're not getting a grad student in some lab to do it. We're going to the professionals in doing this technique, the people who do it all day and all night and who get paid for doing it. Furthermore, whose only incentive is to do good work and get paid for do it, not to get a publication. So we think that's going to add a layer of robustness. We're also going to be increasing effect sizes. In a lot of these papers, the way they chose how many subjects to work with or how many samples to do, and I know from being from my days in the lab, is not necessarily the most scientifically designed. So we're going to be doing the effect size calculations. All of this stuff will be registered with the Open Science Framework, be done as part of the Center for Open Science. So it'll be a more statistically robust from the beginning as well. So I can't say that we'll definitely have the true answer of whether or not a given paper was reproducible or not, but we'll be a lot closer than, and in fact, the other replication studies that have done that have all shown that if you take that more rigorous approach, you're, 90% of the time it's going to reproduce if somebody else can do it.
Regarding the number of documents, you said that you have 400 million documents. What type of documents are these? Because since 1660, there have been around 50 million research articles. So the 400 million, are they also include?
So those are not unique documents. There's about 80 million unique.
Oh,
yep.
80 million. Okay, that's still more than ever published.
Well, that's estimated. But you gotta remember what we also have is we have different versions. We have author preprints versus final published versions. Yeah. We have
I see.
A small fraction that'll be gray literature, various other things like that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
So I have a question too. It strikes me that you have a really interesting opportunity because you have a large user base who are kind of interacting with the system. You have the opportunity to kind of gamify things a little bit and to kind of provide incentives for people to participate in the curation process that obviously an academic researcher wouldn't be able to amass or wouldn't be able to interact with. And of course, this is one of the things that we as biocurators suffer from because it's hard to get people interested and it's hard to get people to actually commit to putting information into the system. So have you any kind of ideas about ways in which the use cases that that this community could provide for you could then feed back into actual mechanisms for incentivizing curation into systems? And I have one more question after that.
Yeah, so that's part of the reason that I was really so interested to come here, was to find out what kinds of projects are ripe for this kind of thing. That's why I was really interested to hear Dr. Hughes talk about the cacao setup. You could essentially think of Mendeley as a much larger scale version of being able to do something like that, right? There's a lot of different ways that we could go. Right now we're in a position of saying, okay, which of these projects do we really want to pick and move forward with. And so this is great to hear all these fascinating projects.
Okay, and then my final question is really your comment about reproducibility and whether or not information that isn't reproducible should be curated at all reminds me of a discussion that was had, I think, a couple of years ago at one of the biocuration meetings when someone was I can't remember exactly who it was, but they were incensed that data was being curated into databases that wasn't correct, right? And in fact, I think that in a way that's a naive perspective. I think that the information that goes into the databases is going to be just as accurate as the information that has come from the literature. You know, I mean, the job of the curator is to kind of review things a little bit and to try and weed out some of the nonsense, but they can't be responsible for trying to curate information into the system themselves. So given that the semantics of what is true is a little more complicated than just if it's in the database then it must be correct and we're expecting it all to be correct, how can we leverage the knowledge representation that these systems are providing? Do you have any thoughts about how we can leverage the communities and the usage statistics that you guys have and the kind of overarching, you know, looking for trends within the way in which usage of knowledge is showing up within your systems to kind of evaluate that and to try and see where that goes?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it depends on what you're trying to achieve with the end product of your curation. So regardless of whether or not the finding turns out to be a true finding or not, it would be good to have some external, non-literature derived signal that you could use in a ranking or a filtering application to say, all right, here are all my hits. Here's the top slice. This is what I'm going to go after first.
Right. Thank you. And let's thank William again. Thank you again.